and you want to come closer, please feel free. I am delighted to be able to introduce our hosts and our three speakers. Do you guys want to come up? So we have Michelle, who is our host for tonight. She's going to be moderating our panel, and I'm realizing the camera, I can't get a good view. Okay, here we go. Michelle will be moderating tonight. She is such a champion here at Namely for our culture and our inclusion and ERGs. She's a member of the Speak Her Mind steering committee, as well as being in a leadership role for BPAN, our Black Professional Network here at Namely, and Dive In, our sort of overarching employee resource group, as well as I think a member of every single ERG. So you can be a member of multiple, which is one of the things that we love here at Namely. And then I am also delighted to introduce our two guest speakers. When I was reading through their bios, I was remarking at all of the commonalities that Gina and Anna have. They both have some work in academia. They are both members of the Hispanic Latinx community. They both are involved really heavily in nonprofits they care deeply about. And we're going to touch on a lot of these topics tonight. Our theme is supporting underserved communities, and it's something that is near and dear to our hearts. A little bit of background on starting with Gina, who's in the center. She's the chair of the Trevor Project, which is a big reason that we've brought her here tonight, as well as being a successful businesswoman and attorney. She has her own law practice and has worked for over 15 years, helping clients make major financial transactions, and has held key marketing leadership roles and business management roles in healthcare. She teaches a course at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy. She is from Texas, which is how she and Michelle had gotten to know each other. And she is a big champion of immigrant issues. She has been in New York for 2 decades, which is a feat for sure. And she is the chair of the Trevor Project. She identifies as a gay Mexican-American woman who grew up in Texas in a Catholic family. And so she very much identifies with teens who are struggling with some of the issues that come up when they're trying to find their place in the world and in society. Anna, who was at one point my former boss. I had the privilege of working for Anna for 2 years. She is currently a director at the Forte Foundation, which is a consortium of major corporations, business schools, and nonprofits invested in increasing the number of women in business leadership positions, particularly around obtaining their MBA. She was previously Chief Diversity Officer at Citi, and she was responsible for developing and overseeing the workforce diversity policy globally. For a company of almost 250,000 people. So definitely the broadest sense of diversity. Her background is rooted in growing and fostering the next generation of leaders. She started her career in academia as the assistant dean for the Parsons School of Design, and she's recently returned to the classroom as an adjunct professor at Columbia for a course on global women in leadership. Anna has spent the many decades in the, or 2 decades in the private sector at one of the world's largest employers, and she's worked to create an infrastructure and business that processes that protect and support underserved populations in the workplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you, Anna and Gina, for joining us tonight. So I'm going to hop right into these questions. You know, you've both spent the bulk of your careers engaged in work that's anchored around our theme tonight, which is mobilizing and protecting and supporting vulnerable populations. But you've had wildly different paths in doing so. So I want to start with Anna. You know, I know you look at a business from a business process and policy level, but are there some basic assumptions that we all need to re-examine if we really want to make a change in reducing the underrepresentation of women in business and leadership positions?
Fun? Yes. Good evening, everyone. And to those of you who I think are dialed in, and just a pleasure to be here. And this question is a great question. Yesterday I shared I had a chance to talk to middle schoolers, 8th graders, as part of a Hispanic role model program. And we talked about a very similar issue, which is among the many things we'd like to see change is the representation of people who are right now underrepresented in business across different sectors. And I worked in this issue for such a long time. And for me, the one thing among others that has not moved that much are the preconceptions people have about ability and talent. And because of that, it impacts where people see potentially someone could move into in a role in leadership. So, and there's a ton of research on this, that there's a question around a woman, for example, all women, their ability to be a leader, their ability to be assertive. And when we started to look at things like performance reviews, a male and a female that did the same thing, one was called a great coach and mentor, and the other one was labeled the mother hen of the bullpen. The same behavior, and that's how it was written about. So there's work that's been done. There's great work now around unconscious bias training, but the challenge persists that often when people walk into a room, they say that more than 80% of it is your presence, that people start to make assumptions immediately. And when there's a preconception about what you can do based upon just simply your personal characteristics, it does have an impact. So that's the one thing that I feel is just continues to be a great opportunity for change, for people to be mindful about it, to be deliberate about challenging one's preconceptions. But it does have, unfortunately, an impact in the representation we see, whether it's 2% of venture capital funding goes to women. You look at and women, for example, are trying to get VC funding, but only 2% are getting it. So we can go further into it, but that to me is one of the many things that we worked on, and yet you continually see people talked about differently and assessed differently simply because of their personal characteristics.
That's a great answer. And I want to pose the same question to Gina, but you've had a wildly different experience and you're looking through a different lens. From your vantage point, are there any basic assumptions that we need to re-examine from the LGBTQ to help support the youth and that the Trevor Project champions and protects?
So I think it's a lot about what Anna was talking about, and thank you for having me, by the way. I think that paying attention to what's happening in conversation around you is really important. It helps so that if somebody's listening to a conversation, you're on the subway, you're anywhere on the street, walking, talking, and you have a conversation that you think is between you and your friend, and perhaps you find it funny because you know each other. You have to remember the people around you don't know you, and they don't know your personality. They don't know who you are. So if I'm a 12-year-old questioning youth, and someone makes a joke and says, well, he walked into the office and he was all out there, super gay, that hurts because I'm not sure what the context is of that conversation. I'm just a 12-year-old hearing that. I think one of the things that we also need to do is when we go home and you have a conversation, if somebody says something that seems just not quite right, you would defend someone if they said, well, we're not going to hire her because she's not good enough. You would say, wait a minute, why is she not good enough? If you hear that about someone and it's related to their gender, sexual identity, religion, anything, have the conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with actually saying to someone, why? You don't have to get aggressive and attack them, but just have the conversation and find out where that's coming from so that people don't hear it, don't keep saying it, and then people hear it, and the people that are hearing it are kids who cannot process that. They don't understand it. They just know you don't like me, and I don't know why. I just know you don't like me. So
That's a great point. Being mindful about intention because everyone can't read that. So to both Anna and Gina, by every definition of vulnerable populations are not in the position of leadership and power. So are there some tactics that you could share with us that you've seen that have successfully been implemented that help underserved populations take the power back and help them find their voice in the everyday environment and in their business world?
Sure. I think so. For me, seeing this firsthand with the Trevor Project, we've created a culture that lends itself to bringing in younger employees, younger volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers. We have 395 volunteers. They are from, I would say, 21 to probably around 70. And these people are taking, all these calls throughout the day for LGBTQ youth that are in need of help. And so we learn from what they do and how they're trained and how they speak to each other, so that we wanted to invite that into the office. So if we're going to hire someone, let's look for that quality, that just that way of being, so that you don't just look for, did they go to Harvard? Were they number one in their class? Are they, that makes them perfect. What makes them perfect is who they are and what they're going to bring to the organization. Of course, everyone has, everyone wants to have that skill set and make sure they can do their job. But don't look at it so much from the paper. That's helpful, but you want something more. I look around this room and it's amazing how diverse this group is. And that's a really great thing to see. And if I'm on the outside and walking into this makes me comfortable, because I know that my business is different, or I know that my family is different. And there's somebody here I can connect with, because the first thing you want to do is connect with someone. You can't help it. It's who you know, what you know, right? So if you can do that and then realize that there's so many other people to connect with, it's a great feeling.
Oh, that's definitely, namely, it's in our values to be yourself and to be able to bring your whole self in.
So I was talking earlier, one of the things that in the company that Claire and I worked at in common was the formation of the employee resource groups, or the ERGs, which you have here. And now we're going back in the day, 20 plus years ago, and we were a very big company, and people were often the only person perhaps in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who was gay, or you might be the only person, the only woman on a team in Taiwan. Actually, Taiwan, we had a lot of women, so we'll pick a different country, Singapore. But there were places where people felt isolated, and we felt that, they would often come to me, and my title was diversity officer. So they would come and talk to me and say, I feel isolated. I don't feel like people listen to me. I don't have a voice. So part of what we did was to create these forums. And it's wonderful to see that you have that here, because it was just a great way to both give people an opportunity to come together with folks who had common interests, common values, common concerns. And then over time, it became a really great way to build allies, so that individuals who felt isolated were able to work and be part of a team that was supportive of them. And it was public that people were supportive. So that was very important. Another thing was to help people have a sounding board, which was often my job, that what they were experiencing was valid. They felt that they weren't being heard at a meeting, as simple as they were interrupted all the time. We worked in a culture where it was very common it was very hierarchical, and the more hierarchical, it supported interruption, idea stealing, and that often happened to people who were the only one, the only woman, the only person of color perhaps, or other. And so we actually would provide training around, how do you run effective meetings? You don't interrupt people, you listen to people, you validate ideas, and gave people the research around it, because that takes away people's voices. When people come to work, I always believed people come to work wanting to be fully contributing. And when these little microisms start showing up at a meeting, suddenly, it's Gina. Gina, that's great that you said that. Wait a second, I said that before. And you may experience that yourselves, but that happens often to people that feel marginalized. They're just not heard. So we tried to put principles in place to enable people to both recognize when it was happening, validate it, and then provide a way to be heard and to feel more powerful, and that they would not lose their voice.
I love that. I've definitely been in that position, and I think I've seen a change just in my own career with having the opportunity to speak out more. And speaking of that, there are things that we can all do on a policy level or at a society level. But Gina, what sort of like policy level priorities is the Trevor Project advocating for, and what can we do to support those?
Right now, our big push is the 50 states, 50 bills, and we're trying to push through banning conversion therapy. New York just recently signed a bill to ban conversion therapy. So it's fascinating that, you live in these cities, New York, LA, and you think everybody here is so accepting and everything's great, and it doesn't happen here. It's only happening in Minnesota. But the truth is it's happening here too. And so I think little decisions are including people, getting involved in different groups, read, go online, read what's happening in your city, in your state, find out if there's something out there that you could participate in. I think people tend to get stuck behind the screen and don't really say something. Sometimes it's good to just go to a meeting of a group that supports something you're into, even, if it's a Latin group, if it's a gay rights group, if it's trans, whatever it may be, get involved. I think that there was a moment in time where people were always getting involved in doing things, and it made a difference. So I think those are the little things you can do day to day where you start to pick up, because then you'll have a conversation with someone and say, did you know? And then they'll say, oh no. And then they'll go read it and someone else will go read it, and it just grows and grows and grows.
Knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
Love it. And Anna, I know that Citi signed amicus briefs in the historic Supreme Court cases, U.S. versus Windsor and Obergefell versus Hodges in the Marriage Equality Act. And it was a bold move for a publicly traded company whose entire business is rooted in stability and avoiding controversies. So how did you mobilize support internally to get the consensus to do the right thing? And even though that created exposure for the shareholders?
Well, it's interesting because one was very difficult. The other one was done so quickly. And I'll just give some background on. So Edith Windsor, got married in Canada. And when her spouse died, her wife, she was going to be taxed for the estate. And she sued because it was under the law, she was going to have to pay taxes on this, but she viewed it as unfair, and it was not being treated fairly. And it became a really important case because across the country, it potentially could open up the door for marriage equality. And many companies that are the size of Citi and other companies that have employees across the 50 states want to be able to move talent, want to be able to say, hey, you're terrific. You want to live in Texas, or you're moving to Texas, we want to keep you. But in the states across this country, we didn't have the opportunity for talent mobility because there were many states that didn't recognize marriage equality. And we also had a tax differential because a company like us, many companies were grossing up employees because the domestic partner tax benefits were being taxed, which was different for an employee who was same sex. So we decided to go further and support the amicus brief, but we had already created, and this is probably the learning, is that we actually did not get to sign an amicus brief with the University of Michigan when they had the affirmative action. I think that was in 2003. It was well before 2007, but we did not sign that amicus brief because we didn't have people. It took too long to make the decision. So this time we created a business case. We showed the value to our employees, and we had employees, the ERG, which was very supportive in helping us build the business case. And at the end of the day, we met with all of the stakeholders across the week. We had to write policy papers. And the bold part was that our CEO called the CEOs of the other banks, and none of them were going to sign it because they said, we have clients across the country. We don't know what this will mean. And we felt we had created, it's like when you go to bring a product, you have to have a business case behind it. So our business case were the employees. our brand, we felt was going to be, was amplified, actually grow stronger as a firm of inclusion. And then we got a call. They were going to, you'll appreciate this as a lawyer, they were going to go to print the amicus brief in California at 5 o'clock, so at 3 o'clock. So we had like 2 hours left. 5 o'clock, they called me and said, all right, we're going to do it. I guess. So we called the attorneys, they put our name in. And then we said, listen, we're like company number 270 that signed on to this amicus brief. It's going to be, it's not going to be a big deal. The next day, the New York Times had Citigroup signs amicus brief on behalf of Edith Windsor. So what mattered there was, a number of us decided it was a fall on the sword moment. Like we were going to push this through because it was the right thing to do. It was right for the company. It was right for our employees. And I guess the learning now, many years later, is you pick and choose those moments that matter. Those moments when you're willing to lose face or lose equity or lose your job maybe because it matters that much. And I think that's when they saw, and it was myself and a number of people, including the leaders of the Pride ERG, that I feel helped us make that decision. And then the second was for marriage equality, and it was, we had already done it. Now all the banks were doing it, but we were the first. So that's a longer story, but again, you pick and choose what matters for the value of the firm, for the value of the company, for the value of the people, and your brand. And for us, it actually ended up being really good for our brand.
That's awesome. So this kind of takes us into the next question, which we all wear multiple layers of identity. So we live in this intersection of sex and religion and gender, cultural heritage. Gina, as you work with more young people who are discovering and understanding all of those characteristics that define themselves, could you share advice that you would give to allies who seek to support them on this journey, and speak to how we can serve as champions to help them grow into multidimensional and strong and empowered adults who are ready to speak up for themselves?
I think that it's interesting because there's a lot of labels there. Yeah. And, part of what makes us who we are our labels. Right. But I think stripping out those labels, not as a definition of the person, but more so a description of the person, makes a big difference. I think that one of the things that one of the things that for me that I've noticed, and we talked about this a little before earlier, but the pronouns, right? So people choose their pronouns, and sometimes people say, I don't get it. I can't refer to someone in the third person. And if you don't actually try to bring that into your vocabulary, it really is just as hurtful as going up to someone and, if I started calling you Christina and you're like, my name's Michelle. I'm like, yeah, anyway. So, it's still important. It's a very important thing. And I think those little moments are things to remember. I think it's important if you don't have to walk around saying, hi, I'm Gina. I identify as her, she, but if you know that someone does and someone makes a comment and someone uses the wrong pronoun, and it's happened to me. I was at an event for the Trevor Project, and I'm walking around, and oh, nice to meet you. I'm the chair, and everything's so great. Everyone's talking to me, and I said, oh, she was amazing. And the CEO looks at me and says, they. I was like, oh, no, I did it. I'm the person that did it. And I didn't think it was a negative thing, and I didn't feel like I got shamed or I was scolded, but I really felt like I had been, it was not disrespectful, but I didn't give them the credit to be who they are. And once you start using the pronouns, it's very easy to do. It seems complicated, but it's really not. And I think little things where you just pay attention to what's happening or to the person that they're speaking to, and thinking about, sometimes people make a joke about something and you don't actually know what's happening behind the scenes. So someone can take something and it could really ruin their day. It could also snowball into something that's just so incredibly ridiculous, and you didn't mean that, but just think about it. Just take a step and think about who you're talking to, and think about what what would you like for them to say to you, right? So most people are not starting off confrontational and wanting to get into a battle. Most people are just starting their day, starting that moment, and would really appreciate being told, yeah, I didn't really like that, and actually they prefer to be called, her or whatever it is that is happening at that moment. Just be aware of it. Don't just brush it off like, just another day. So what? They'll get over it. I think that they'll get over it part is where people forget just how much people don't get over things. I mean, there's a reason why we do have this National Suicide Hotline, why we have Trevor Group, why you have mental illness coming up all the time now, because it's those little things that just hurt. And every day when you add one more in and one more in and one more in, it becomes overwhelming.
Definitely. So for those young people and all of the young people who are starting to enter the workforce, Anna, could you share how we could all work to create conditions that help the youth feel supported in the workspace? And are there, specific strategies to a business setting where we can create those conditions for the multiple dimensions of each of our team members?
Oh, sure. And, your story, by the way, reminded me when I worked at Parsons School of Design. Oh, and I worked with Tim Gunn there, if you know who he is, which is pretty cool. Yeah, he was for many years. But anyway, one of the things that would happen, we had students coming from Korea and Japan, and some of the faculty did not want to learn the name. So if someone's name was Ying Ong or something, they'd say, I'm going to call you Jeannie. And it was done all the time. So it's just such a lack of respect around. And we would talk with the students and say, that doesn't feel okay to me. Oh, no, it's okay. Because again, it was just not, there was a cultural respect for teachers, but what a lack of respect, So anyway, the question's a great one because in particular, it's interesting because Namely works in that HR space, So one of the things that when you think about it, when all of you joined Namely, you probably like, well, what kind of benefits do they have? And one of the things that people often look at are benefits. And if the benefit doesn't recognize you and your family, if they're not extended to you, or an example of that, we had an MBA student, because we work with MBAs and undergrads, who had an internship, and she and her wife lived in California. And when she was interviewing, she got an internship in the Midwest. And the company, she was talking to them about housing for the summer. And she said, what kind of housing do you have? And she said, my wife and I will be coming here for the summer. And they said, well, we offer housing for married couples. And she said, okay, so my wife and I we offer housing for married couples. So wasn't listening that this is my wife and I'm a married couple. Right. So already, even though that person who was speaking to her actually wasn't sharing the right policy, they would offer even to domestic partners, they were going to offer housing. Already the brand was contaminated because what this person heard was your frontline recruiter doesn't get it. So what people hear immediately matters, looking at your policies, looking at this is beautiful, this wall, mosaic wall. Someone who's walking around here newly onboarding looks at that and thinks, this is great. This represents the culture. So making sure people feel represented, welcome. I go back to what Gina said, saying people's names, their pronouns as they wish. Talking about things that matter to people, those things really matter. And then I'll close on this. We had a conference this summer for women of color, so Latina, Black women, and other women who identify as women of color. And these are 18 to 21-year-olds. They were asking questions like, can I wear my hair in braids? Is that going to be viewed as I'm not career motivated? Are people going to think that, are they only interviewing me because I'm Black? And I was both aghast because that's what goes through an 18-year-old's head these days. And then we had a great panel of people that talked about what you should do if someone questions you and all of that. So again, those concerns are real, they're there. And so we as employers have to be very mindful that what you present, your policy, your culture, from the minute they meet with a recruiter to the minute they come on board, that they feel inclusive and supported. So
I agree. Those are 18-year-old concerns, but those are also 25 and 34-year-old concerns as well. I mean, I can personally attest to that, knowing the difference between having the opportunity or the perception be that you can't be your natural self in your work environment. So that's a really great point. So for both Gina and Anna, have you ever experienced advocating for or guiding a colleague or a peer through a challenging situation where their gender or sexual identity or other defining characteristic was a factor? And like, can you share like specifics about how it was resolved, what the situation was, and if you could go back and do it again, would you handle it the same way?
Yeah, this is a great question because it really made me think about a lot of people. As the diversity officer, a lot of people would come and talk to me. But there was one situation that I would do differently, and that's the one I thought of. I had a team member who was, her personality was, she kind of led with defiance. So she was a lot like my sister, very argumentative. And so she had to like win her point all the time, and that was her thing. And so she got into something with a colleague in another department, and she came back to me and she said, you know, this is about race. She's treating me like this because I'm a Black female, a Black woman. She's not hearing me. She's disrespecting me. And so we talked a lot about what she experienced and what other times she may have experienced this and how she felt this way in the workplace. So long story short, there was also a performance issue with this person. And I felt that she wasn't getting the feedback about her performance and hadn't from other managers because of this aspect of, oh, she's going, and this is, you know, a problem for people of color and women, that sometimes we don't get the feedback because people are afraid we're going to be litigious, especially in large companies, I think. And it's getting better because performance reviews are different than they were. So this woman had actually not been given feedback about her communication and her effectiveness because of that. And now it was blending in with a perception she had about this colleague. So we worked it out. We got people to talk about what was expected. And she did share that she had felt disrespected, and it was very good between the two of them. They actually became better colleagues. However, I think that now I would have, as a manager, really understood performance better and been giving her more developmental feedback than what she'd been getting, so that she could unbundle feedback about performance and a perception of racial identity, which is complex, you know, because you can,
Absolutely.
very complex. But I was, you know, many years ago and knew her at the job and just didn't know what was going on as they were having a fight. Like, that was, wow, people fighting, you know? And so I was, wow, I like yelling at each other. So I don't know, does that happen here a lot? I don't know, it's like, it's just interesting of work environments that, you know, especially in banking, you know, in certain floors people screamed, but this was HR, so.
Yeah, it was a really interesting question, and it made me think of a couple of different things. But so I sort of took a bunch of stories and put them together. But one of the things that I've had to deal with being on the board is, obviously there's a lot of different people on the board, and everyone has a different personality, a different background, and then we interact with the staff. And so when you're having these conversations, if you are sending an email, you don't know, and you don't send sort of a long story about it, you just say, hey, I think this is great, and someone doesn't respond to you, you take it in a bad way. And so you start to have, if you don't stop and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? People start to assume, well, you don't respect me, or you don't like me, or you don't value what I'm doing. And so one of the things that I've seen that I often had to deal with both on the board and also with my sister and her job as a teacher is that if you don't just stop and say to somebody, hey, I really need you to give me that paperwork back, or the feedback, or can you please get this to so-and-so? I need it there by, 2:00. And I just want to make sure that you did it, just following up that it's done. People start to say, well, I said, I said, could you do this for me? They didn't answer me. That's because they don't respect me. And I think they don't respect me because I am a person of color, and maybe it's because I'm gay, or maybe it's because I'm trans. And it starts to roll out into this giant story in your head, and you go down this massive rabbit hole that it was really the person actually has been out sick for 2 days and didn't see your email. But it's too late because you've created this dynamic, and then you go and say to someone, oh my God, that person is horrible. I can't believe they would do that. I'm just as smart. I've been in this role long enough. It's really, really bad to jump to conclusions, but we have to remember that it goes both ways, right? So if you get an email from someone, or you get a request from someone, or you get a phone call, return it. Have the communication. If you're not sure because that communication was not the best, you go to the HR group, right? And have a conversation and try to resolve it before it completely escalates. And I think that was one of the things for me that I had to really learn to jump in sooner rather than later, because if I let them go, it was going to be, my sister, for instance, had a situation at work. She calls me, she's having this whole thing. I don't know why he hates me. My boss hates me. I'm going to quit. Why? He hates me. Why? She couldn't answer the question. She really could not answer the question. And then it became, well, he's jealous because I'm the bilingual ed teacher and he wants the kids to only have English. And okay, at the end of what was a very long story that lasted about a year, it turns out and this is how it came back to me, it turns out that his son was struggling with his identity and was trying to transition and to start the process of becoming a woman, and he could not deal with it because he's in Texas, in Catholic Mexican Texas, in the heart of it, and
Yes.
He doesn't know how he tells his
familiar.
friends and the people he works with that his son is probably going to show up as a woman in a while. And after they had the conversation, and it was only because she said, my sister's with the Trevor Project and I think we should do this, and he just click. Everything changed. Totally different conversation. So turns out they're best friends. He loves her to death. There's not an issue there. He actually thought that she should be promoted more than she had been. They didn't talk. So, I think for me, it's one of those things you just got to get in there early.
You never know what the other person's story is.
Yep.
So taking that step of faith or courage or whatever you need it to be
Right.
to extend that communication to the other side.
Yep.
Definitely. Well, I'm sure everyone has a few more questions, so I want to open it up to our remote team members and our audience for more questions for Gina and Anna. So raise your hand.
Who has questions? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Small group. I'm going to pick on someone soon. Okay.
Thank you, ladies. That was really insightful, especially with your experience. And the question I have is, sometimes when you enter workspaces as a Latina, I find some people have difficulty talking about identity. How have you managed that, or how do you, as a manager, facilitate those discussions so that people can be their self at the job site?
That gets to that aspect of bringing your whole self to work. And typically I've just been I'd like to get to know when people work for me about what matters to them, what are they interested in, what are the things that they're particularly proud of. Sometimes people get a little sensitive around, tell me about your background. But if you say, what are the things that matter to you? What are some of the things that you feel particularly proud of? What are some things that you feel make you unique to others in the work environment here? What is something that is different about you that you'd like to be valued here? Just to get people to talk about themselves in different prompt questions. People often will talk about themselves. And then I think it has to be reflected in, it gets back to the culture. Like if people feel it's an inclusive culture and that in truth it's valued, they'll feel more comfortable talking about it. You know, going back again into when some of the studies that the Human Rights Campaign did showed us, for example, that people that were out in college when they came to a company were not out. Because why? Because they didn't feel included. They didn't feel it was going to be valued and it could be a career obstacle. So that the culture needs to match the question. So if as a manager, you start talking to people about what makes you different? How do you want that to support or be part of what you bring to the workplace? Tell me more about your interests, your strengths, your uniqueness. They want to know, like, oh gosh, if I say this, is that going to mean they're going to think I'm not so smart? So again, has been important. And again, I've also seen where people shut down where they don't think it's going to be valued. So sure.
Other questions?
Thank you both so much for sharing a bit of your experience and your story. I was actually going to ask you, aside from employee resource groups as well as certain events for groups of individuals at an organization, what is a way in which that you would encourage either managers or supervisors to either provide comfort for somebody in an underrepresented community without putting them in a place of discomfort? Or how would you more or less, as a manager or supervisor, lend your hand to support somebody?
I mean, I think that comes back to listening and watching what's happening. So if you are around as a manager, if you're around and you're paying attention to what your staff is doing and you have moments where you just talk to them, you will hear things that eventually start to trigger something's not quite right here. And then you can have a conversation and say, you know, I noticed you looked kind of disconnected from the group. Is everything going okay? Things all right? And you don't have to automatically start with, are you upset because they made a joke in your, XYZ? I think that it's paying attention to what's happening and being able to approach that person in the appropriate way and in a way that I think, builds that environment where they can then come to you. Because if you look like a manager who sits in your office all the time and everything is happening out there and you're like, just don't come to me until it's bad, no one's going to come to you. So I think you have to extend a hand. And I will say that I think these open layouts help that in companies because you're there face to face, you see the person, you're hearing the person, and you can actually not just be this person that sits in a back room somewhere that nobody knows, but you go to them if you think you're just about to get fired or you need to file a complaint against someone.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And workplaces are different now. When I was baby employee, it was like the guys would go for drinks and maybe they'd invite the girls or not, or there'd be like the golf weekend that the girls were not invited to and so forth. So things that became exclusive around how you spent time and cliques, like a manager would have 2 people they hung out with and that's who they'd go. Here it'd be like if only 3 guys would play foosball or 3 girls and the rest of the team is not included. So that people notice that. They notice the meeting after the meeting. They notice the person that goes and can come in to talk to you whenever, and the other person has to make an appointment. So as a manager, you want to have some parity across how you, as Gina said, how do you interact with people, and that we don't create these little subcultures, even on an open floor. It's visible who is hanging out with who. So I think that as a manager, that's one of the best things we can do is develop people to try to have parity. We're all going to have people that we feel more, in sync with and all of that, but that becomes really visible to people. So that is really important. I think, as Gina said very elegantly, it's just creating that sense of inclusion and not having the meeting after the meeting. That used to really bug us. This one guy I worked for, he'd always have like 3 guys would run in there after the meeting. And we'd be like, whoa, there go the bros, so.
Other questions?
You spoke before about that 18 to 21-year-old group and questioning, why you're not either being promoted or getting hired. At what point in both of your careers did you feel like it kind of clicked and you were like, I'm worth this in my company? Or do you still have like those kind of feelings going into maybe a new position or promotion?
So, exactly. I think we've actually touched on this a little bit earlier, but we're older, so we both sort of came through in a generation that you went to high school, you went to college, you got a job, you were happy with your job, you just kind of went with the flow. You never went against the stream. You never tried to come up with anything innovative. That was for like the really crazy, super smart people somewhere else. You just did it, right? I think that the difference now is because of technology and because of the fact that we have so many more freedoms, we have so many more opportunities to do something different and to innovate, that people who are younger, millennials, Gen Z, the millennials are sort of stuck in the middle because I think they're the group that's trying to figure out, I'm not quite my mom and dad's type of work ethic, but I'm also not just a free for all. I don't care what I do. I'll just go surf somewhere, right? And I think so. You're always kind of looking at when does it get better, and I think ultimately it fits and it works when it fits for you, right? So I had done law for a long time. I had worked and I started in advertising, and then I worked at the hospital for a very long time, and then I did law sort of with the hospital. Everything was just going along perfectly. And then when I started doing work with Trevor, with the Trevor Project, that was the moment. I mean, and that was 8 years ago now, I guess. That was the moment it clicked for me. And I realized, okay, this is my job. This is my love, my purpose. And it really wasn't until that moment that I really felt like accomplished. So for some people, I think your accomplishment will be what feeds your soul. For some people, it is going to be what your salary is. And for some people, it's going to be constantly innovating. I mean, I have friends who are they're entrepreneurs, and all they do is come up with something different, sell it, something different, sell it. And they have no attachment to it, but it makes them happy, right? So I think you just sort of have to feel out for yourself what are you looking for, really? I mean, if you want to be surfing in, California all the time, so then maybe you consider opening a surf shack, right? And doing something different and try it out. But I think that it has to be a combination of things. I think you need to, it could be family, it could be pets, it could be anything. But I think it's not just, this is my job, I now get a promotion, I get a promotion, I get done. Just don't think that, I personally don't see it that way.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add differently is that at one point in my career, I was really mad that I didn't get a promotion, and I let a lot of people know about it. And they said, excuse me, we didn't know you were interested in this job. So that was a big aha for me, that the muscle I was putting into complaining about it, I had not done anything to talk about how I felt I was ready for the job. I should have been the candidate for the job. And that's not uncommon when you're sort of hunkered down, working hard, and you just think everyone thinks you're brilliant. In fact, nobody knew I was interested in this job. So that's important to be, you don't want to be like a serial poster. I don't know how you look for roles like at Namely and other places. Some people like apply for every job. You're like, oh God, not again. But to let people know, and sometimes that conversation helps you have some insights about your career. So I would say performance matters. I think people that perform and are hard, smart, talented, innovative, and get results, that is a great thing to bring forward to a next job. It makes you attractive. So then that little jitter is always still there, I think, a little bit. Even if you're interviewing for and now in my career, I interview for like boards, like for nonprofit boards and things like that. And you're still going through an interview and you have to talk about yourself. I feel like, but now Gina said that, like the narrative's more comfortable because you feel like you have this set of accomplishments versus when you're on your way up, you're developing those accomplishments.
And I will add to that. I have someone who works for me who he's a great guy, really, really great. And he's at the start of his career. He's probably 24 now, but he's really, really good. And so finally I said to him, I said, so do you want a promotion or anything? He's like, nope. He's like, I don't want to be in a management position. He's like, I like what I'm doing. I don't want to. And he's totally happy doing that. So I think, you got to ask for it if you want it. But you're right, performance counts. If you can't walk in there and say, I'd like to be the CEO, they're like, well, you started yesterday, right? So.
Hi. So I'm relatively new in my career, and I, in passing, have heard some offensive things in the office. And I go home at night and I feel guilty for not being an ally in those situations. So I guess, how would you recommend being an ally and standing up to potentially like directors and senior management without an uncomfortable conversation or without them being defensive and having it affect possibly my career? Any advice on conversations?
There are a couple of, and I know there's some HR people here, so there's both what's sort of knuckleheaded behavior and intentional behavior. And I think part of it is, you've got advisors here, I'm sure, I know some of them, that are helpful around helping you. No, but just in general, okay, in any organization that this happens, to talk to people about the culture and what you're observing, and that, but there are a couple of things though. Like, we had people that I worked with over the years, I would just say things, and we're going to talk later, but not to be a bystander is a big thing for me. So, because you don't know who else is hearing it the way you're hearing it. Talking with the person privately is always good. Pulling them aside and saying, hey, we were just talking and you said a couple of things that I heard this way. Often the person will say, really? Say, yeah, but it's not okay. It's making me uncomfortable. It's making other people uncomfortable. Sometimes that will stop it. Other times it won't. And you really do need to get other people involved who can have a coaching or conversation around the culture of the organization. It's already making you uncomfortable, and my guess is there are other people it's making uncomfortable too. And it can actually get much bigger and get into what we define as a hostile work environment and so forth. So I would say, don't go home and sweat about it. Start to talk to someone. If you feel comfortable, perhaps talk to the person. If not, though, talk to an advisor, an HR partner, or someone that can help you shape how that will what will happen. Because sometimes people they're knuckleheaded, or sometimes people actually are intentional and they're bullies.
Yeah, I think that's right. Going back and going to their HR and just saying, don't give your opinion on whether or not you thought they meant it or didn't mean it. It's more of, here's what I heard, and it kind of made me uncomfortable. Just wanted to let you know. And they may just go to this person, and this person's going to say, I have no idea I even said that. So, and sometimes they just need a little education, but I think you're right. If it goes on and it becomes a bigger situation, now you're having something that has just kind of wreaked havoc through the office for no reason. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You don't have to go in and say, Bob's a real whatever. Just, I was in this conversation, it made me uncomfortable. That's it.
More questions?
Time for one more question.
Oh, perfect.
Anna and Gina, thank you again for being here. It's an honor to have you guys. My name is Cindy, and I was just curious to know, I have a two-part question. My first part is, did you always know what you wanted to do in your career? Like, did you know what profession you wanted to follow? The part B will be, there are a lot of us that are kind of still figuring out what's their calling. We might be higher at a company, and we might be doing good, and we might be getting promotions, but we're not using these other skills that we know we have internally, or maybe we don't know, but we could be good at? And what would you advise to the people that still trying to figure it out, that there are other ways where they can show their talent, or they can, be more supportive in an environment by giving the best of themselves?
I'm going to start with the second question that you said, because I was thinking of a friend of mine who was in the investment bank, and she was terrific, but she also had leadership skills and other things. And she started to volunteer for recruiting or other things that she could do in the company, where she was not in front, she was in front of different people, and she was adding value back to the company. And I know that some folks here are involved with the ERGs, that you do other things around the company, and people recognize that, and they see the initiative that you take, and it gives you a chance with lower consequence to test out new skills. So that's one way of doing it. I always encouraged my team members, if they were interested in doing something that wasn't part of their work, how could we make that happen? Could they be on a project? Could they do something with a different department, so that you could test that skill? So don't see what the opportunities are. So volunteering to work on something that matters to the company, talking to see if you can get involved in other projects. If it's not happening here, maybe outside in a community project where you can take on a leadership role or other things, because that builds your portfolio, and it's something you can talk about as you advance in your career. And then the first part of your question, did I always know I was going to be a diversity officer? No. However, I grew up in an environment where, there was a lot of issue around being different. I was born in the in the time of the civil rights era. So there were issues around integration. And so that was something I was always an advocate. My mother said I always needed a fight because I needed something to fight about. She goes, "Oh, you just like fighting." But advocacy mattered to me. It's probably the value that's moved throughout my life. So ending up in diversity and inclusion was a great place to do that. And now I'm working with young women, trying to help them feel motivated and inspired to advance in their careers. So did I know exactly? No, but I knew what moved me. Yeah, exactly. I knew my passion.
So I had no idea. And I think I started off thinking I was going to be an artist. And then I decided, my mother decided for me that I was going to either be a doctor or a lawyer. So I chose doctor. And then I went to college and started taking organic chemistry, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. So I wanted to do, and I didn't want to do law because that was the other option I had. So I just automatically had to say no. So I decided I would go into advertising or some sort of consulting, like at Price Waterhouse or something big like that. And as I went through and finished, I got a job at a market research firm, and I was there during the O.J. Simpson trial, and they held a mock trial and we were there. And so they brought in jurors, and they held one in New York and one in California. In New York, he was guilty. In California, he was not. And so all of a sudden, I'm fascinated by these attorneys in the room and what's happening. And I was like, this is it. I have to go to law school. She was right. So I did. So I went to law school, and it was great. I mean, I enjoyed it. Within that, I chose what I wanted to do, but obviously I also decided to do other things to supplement what I needed. So I started getting involved in healthcare consulting, and that was interesting to me because the healthcare industry is fascinating and the most convoluted thing out there. But you ultimately get to see how it helps people. So I have the advantage that if my friends get stuck and they can't figure out what to do, I know who to call. And then for law, I decided to do real estate transactions because everybody ends up happy. And so you're happy you're selling, you're happy you're buying. It's great. I mean, there are the occasional crazy situations, but still people oriented. And then I got involved with the Trevor project, and that was fantastic. And at some point in the middle of all that, I started doing a public speaking class at the Woodrow Wilson School once a year. And that was fascinating because I got to all these, I call them kids, but all these students who came in, and every time they tell their story about the things they've done, I mean, they're 20 years old and they've done so much work in Uganda or Rwanda or somewhere else, these amazing peace missions and just public policy. It's unbelievable to me. So I think that if you have other things you're interested in, there are ways to get into that. I think take a class at like the Learning Annex, right? So there's places around the city you can take free classes, you can take really cheap classes. And if it's something you're interested in, like maybe you like floral design, you can take a class and see if you're really into it, or is it just a hobby, right? Because you think that that's really where you have to figure out, like, I loved art, but art is my hobby. It wasn't going to be my career. So you find what it is, and if you feel, I think Anna's right, if you feel that there's something you can contribute differently to this organization or wherever you happen to be working, just ask. You know, I'd love to like get on that team and just learn about it because I have some free time if you guys don't mind. Or hey, you know, I'll volunteer and help organize one of these events if that's it. And then see how it plays out in your personal life too, right? So if you are very interested in HR and you think, wow, I'm always spending my time telling my friends how they can meet other people and what they should be talking about and what's interesting. And, oh, well, let me set you up with this person. You guys will be best friends. Those are the kind of things, pay attention to those things, because those things will give you an insight as to what you're attuned to.
Well, that was a great way to end tonight. Thank you, Anna and Gina, so much
Thank you for having us.
joining a conversation. And thank you everyone for coming both in New York and in our sister offices in San Francisco and Atlanta. We still have refreshments and networking time afterwards. So this is the end of our Speaker Mind for tonight. Thank you all so much.